It's the boy Blackbeard, the assassin. I'm back. Major salute. What's happening? All the ladies and gentlemen, you tuned in live for another Midnight Mirage Classic. And today in this tape, we're going to deal with some super ancient information. Some real super ancient information. We're going to talk about the Aboriginal Americans, of course. We're going to get a greater expansive understanding of the identity of the Aboriginal Americans. And we are going to get a look into what was going on in the world before the flood. Okay, or the pre-deluge world, all right, the old world, the super ancient old world in the times of Atlantis, known also as ancient or old America, all right. So sometimes you will hear me use Atlantis, but that is synonymous with America. So real briefly, let's go into a few terms that we're going to look into today. We're going to talk about Amaru, Meru. We're going to talk about Atlantis. We're going to talk about Turtle Island. We're going to talk about Eden, as in the Garden of Eden. And we're also going to talk about America, okay? So all these places that I'm talking about really going to lead you to the, massive continents in the Western Hemisphere of the world. So that is, of course, the Americas, North, Central, and South America, okay? And these North, Central, and South Americas have went through different names throughout time. They went through the name of Atlantis. It went through the name of Turtle Island. It went through the name of Eden, such as the Garden of Eden. It went through also Amaru, Meru. In modern times, it's going as the name America. But what we're going to look at today is we're going to kind of, dig into the history of Amaru Meru, or also known as Mount Meru. And we're going to talk about how Mount Meru was known as the home of the gods in the Vedic text of ancient India or ancient Ethiopia. OK, so we're going to also tie how Ethiopia has a connection to the Aboriginal Americans, because in some of the different accounts of the Spanish and Portuguese so-called explorers, they did make statements that the people that they came across in the Americas resembled Ethiopians. Okay, so although we know of the country, in East Africa named Ethiopia today, but in the old world, from a lot of what I've read, there were multiple massive regions of space and massive regions of land that was named Ethiopia. Okay. So Ethiopia is a very, very super ancient term, and it has been applied to Aboriginal people itself. So the word Ethiopia, the word Aboriginal, and believe it or not, the word Meru, these all are somewhat synonymous. And you'll see why I say that in a minute, because Aboriginal people, of course, were the first people on the planet. And the information that I'm going to go into in a little while is going to show you all how the Ethiopians, or the people from Mount Meru, were the first people of the planet. So the resources that I'm coming out of is a book called Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Houston. Excuse me. It's called Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Houston. And in this book, we're going to talk about Mount Meru, or Meru, which is an ancient city that in Vedic mythology, this is where they say the gods come from. Also, too, you will hear the word Asiatic being used sometimes when it refers to Aboriginal people. This is taking you a little bit, towards back to the times of Pangea, where it was the supercontinents. So when we say Asia, Asia covers a pretty large landmass as well. So we're going to kind of jump around into that. And we will also talk about the Garden of Eden in the Central America region. So this tape ultimately is dealing with the history of Mount Meru. It is going to deal with the history of Amaru Meru. It will deal with the history of the ancient Ethiopians, or ancient Aboriginal Americans. Okay. And we will tie all this together into the Garden of Eden, or in Central America in the Yucatan Peninsula. All right. So you will, I guess, see how your identity is tied into the ancient Cushite Empire by the end of this tape. So as I told you all, one of the books that I'm reading is called Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Houston, excuse me. And we're going to read about Ethiopia, Meru, or Eden, known also as the Garden of Eden. All right. So let's go into it. Ethiopians were the first men that ever lived, the only true autochthonous race, and the first to institute the worship of the gods and the rites of sacrifice. Egypt itself was a colony of Ethiopia, and the laws and script of both lands were naturally the same, but the hieroglyphic script was more widely known to the vulgar in Ethiopia than in Egypt. This knowledge of writing was universal in Ethiopia, but was confined to the priestly class alone in Egypt. This was because the Egyptian priesthood was Ethiopian. The highly developed Meroitic inscriptions are not found in Egypt north of the cataract or in Nubia south of Soba. These are differences we would expect to find between a colony and a parent body. Herodotus says that Meru was a great city and a metropolis. Most of its buildings were of red brick. So let's go through this real quick. So the first thing that this author is putting is that the Ethiopians were the first men to ever live in the first true Autochthonous race and the first to institute the worship of the gods and the rites of the sacrifice. So right now we are referring to the original Aboriginal Autochthonous indigenous people of the planet as Ethiopians, the copper-colored, bronze-colored Aboriginal races of the planet. Okay. Next, it goes on to say that Egypt itself was a colony of Ethiopia. Now, when they talk about Egypt, don't just think that they're talking about in East Africa now, because this Ethiopia that we're talking about is much older than the present day Ethiopia in East Africa. So if they are saying that all autochthonous people of the planet are Ethiopians, then that means that maybe the whole planet may be called Ethiopia. Just like if you go into the ancient Hebrew text, when they talk about Egypt in the Old Testament, it's not necessarily talking about just a country or a particular, region in Northeast Africa. If you go into the Kabbalistic text, it will tell you that Egypt is the entire world itself. Okay. So it says that Egypt was a colony of Ethiopia. Okay. Then it goes on to say as well that the universal writing systems comes from Ethiopia. And it said that the Egyptian priesthood actually was from Ethiopia. But now we're going into where the word Meru comes from, because as I said, the gods come from Mount Meru. America comes from the name Amaru, Meru, and the indigenous people of America are sometimes referred to as Moors or the people of Meru. So listen up. It says that Herodotus says that Meru was a great city and it was a metropolis of Ethiopia. All right, let's continue. So it says the Encyclopedia of Biblical Literature says, quote, there is every reason to conclude that the separate colonies of priest class spread from Meru into Egypt, and the primeval monuments in Ethiopia strongly confirm the native traditions. That the worship of Zeus-Ammon originated in Meru, also the worship of Osiris. This would render highly probable the opinion that commerce, science, and art descended into Egypt from the Upper Nile. Herodotus called the Ethiopians wise men occupying the Upper Nile, men of long life, whose manners and customs pertaining to the Golden Age. Those virtuous mortals whose feasts and banquets are honored by Jupiter himself. So real quick, let's go through this one. So it says that the separate colonies of the priest class spread from Meru into Egypt. And it also says that the primeval monuments in Ethiopia strongly confirm the native traditions of the worship of Zeus-Ammon, and they originated in Meru, also the worship of Osiris. And this is the part where we're going to hit at. It says that the commerce, science, and arts descended into Egypt from the Upper Nile. Now, let's go into this. Now, most of us thinking, once again, that they talking about somewhere in the Far East Africa. Present day, modern day Egypt, present day, modern day Ethiopia. But if you look into a lot of the occult esoteric literature out there, if you can find some of it, that talks about the flood. And it talks about when the world was saturated, basically from these polar caps melting and different cataclysmic events, geographical, natural events. But it will say that the lands of the Americas were the first to rise during the flood, or after the flood, excuse me. If you look into some of the old information, it will say that the lands of America, the lands of the North Gate, the lands of Turtle Island were the first to rise after the flood. So imagine the whole world being submerged and covered with water, let's say. And now imagine when the land first starts to appear through the waters, because you got to remember that the land appearing through the waters is also known as Malkuth. Okay, the physical matter or the physical lands, the rocky lands that were, that were rising out of the flood. Okay, these first lands actually were known as Atlantis or America. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that after the flood was over, America, or so-called Atlantis, this aspect of the world over here, was the first to rise out of that. So when they talk about the Upper Nile, ancient Egypt, ancient Ethiopia, once again, they're talking about South America, Central America people. Also remember that the Mississippi River is sometimes also viewed as the Nile River, So the Mississippi River and the Nile River are synonymous. Okay. Also think about the city of Memphis in Tennessee, just like you have the city of Memphis in Egypt. Also, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have my map in front of me right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if the city of Memphis is not too far away from the Mississippi River itself, because we know that a lot of our ancestors would build their metropolis and they would build their major cities and civilizations around the water. Okay. So when they talk about the Upper Nile, I want you to think the Mississippi River, the Amazon River, and a lot of different rivers over here in America. All right. So let's continue. It says, the Puranas, the ancient historical books of India, speak of the civilization of Ethiopia as being older than that of Egypt. These Sanskrit books mention the names of old Cushite kings that were worshipped in India and who were adopted and changed to suit the fancy of the later people of Greece and Rome. So let's go through this. So the Puranas, which are the ancient historical books of India, speak of the civilization of Ethiopia being older than that of Egypt. So that's your first thing. Ethiopia is older than Egypt. The second thing is that these Sanskrit texts in ancient India speak of old Cushite kings who were worshipped in India. So this is my first question to you. Why are they worshiping Cushite kings or ancient Ethiopian kings in India? Why are ancient Ethiopian kings and gods being mentioned in the Vedic and Sanskrit texts of ancient India, if it was a point in time where the whole world wasn't ruled by one autochthonous Aboriginal people? So what I'm telling you right now is that when we talk about the Cushite Empire in a little bit, this is a worldwide empire. Now, some of us have this separatism mentality, and if you have that, that's on you. But even when they talk about Nimrod in the Old Testament, and they talk about Chaldea, Cush, and these old ancient empires, these worldwide empires, these are the times that we're talking about. All right. And like it says here, it says that these Sanskrit books mention the names of Cushite gods who were worshipped in India and who were later adopted and changed to fit the later day people of Greece and Rome. So when we hear about, let's say, Zeus-Ammon, okay, now in Greek mythology, most of us know of Zeus being the king of the gods or the father of the gods. But what they're not really telling us is that Zeus comes from ancient Ethiopia, and his name in Ethiopia is Zeus-Ammon. Now, you know how in ancient Egypt they have Amun-Ra? Well, Amun is actually a pre-dynastic god. Amun is a pre-dynastic god from ancient Cush or ancient Ethiopia. And it also shows you how ancient Greece or ancient Rome is nothing but an extension of ancient Egypt, which is nothing but an extension of ancient Ethiopia or ancient Cush. So this is why when you look at a lot of Greek mythology, it seems very, very similar to Egyptian mythology, because the ancient Greeks or the ancient Romans, the ancient Etruscans, the ancient Minoans, the ancient people of old Europe, these were Ethiopians. Okay, let's keep going. The Hindu Puranas speak of the Cushites going to India before they went to Egypt, proving Hindu civilization coeval with that of Chaldea and the country of the Nile. These ancients record that the Egyptians were a colony drawn out of Cushite, and that the Pali, another colony that made the Phoenicians, followed them from the land of Cush. In those primitive days, the central seat of Ethiopia was not the Meru of our day, which is very ancient, but a kingdom that preceded it by many ages, that was called Meru. Lenormand spoke of the first men of the ancient world as men of Meru. Sanskrit writers called Indra, chief god of the Hindu, king of Meru. He was deified and became the chief representative of the supreme being. Thus was primitive India settled by colonists from Ethiopia. Early writers said there was very little differences in the color or features of the people of the two countries. So let's go through this one by one. So the first thing is, it says that in the Hindu Puranas, which are the ancient books from India, speak of the Cushites going into India before into Egypt. So that means that the Ethiopians created the Sanskrit or the Vedic system even before some of your later day Egyptian. That's why when you look into stuff, it'll say that Sanskrit is one of the oldest languages on the world. Sanskrit was one of the languages first created by these super primordial Ethiopians. It next goes on to say that Egypt was a colony drawn out of Cushite. And Cushite is this ancient old Nimrod, we could say one world system. And Egypt is nothing but a colony of that. Just like ancient America is a colony of that. Okay. Going on, it says that in those primitive days that the central seat of Ethiopia was the very ancient kingdom called Meru. And it says that the first men of the ancient world were known as men of Meru, and that the Sanskrit writers called Indra, which is the chief god of the Hindus, the king of Meru. So this is so now you see why I'm using this word Meru, because think about this connection. So if the word Meru is being used in ancient Ethiopia, but it's saying right here that ancient Ethiopia, or at least one of the home bases of it, is ancient India. But in the Vedic Sanskrit text, they say that the gods come from Meru. Well, if that is the case, and I just said that the first lands to rise out of the flood were in America, now you can understand why America has the Meru tied to it, such as Amaru, Meru. Why do you think the word Peru, or the country, or in Peru, is in South America? And the legend of Amaru is in South America, because South America is Atlantis, or it is Mount Meru. Okay. And if you look into the mythology of Amaru Meru, it will say that Amaru Meru was, long story short, a Christ figure or a Christ hero that led the Aboriginal indigenous people of the planet post the flood and helped them set new civilizations in the Americas. So that's who they say Meru is. They say that Meru is an ancient Christ god that had science, technology, and led the Aboriginal people who survived the flood to start civilizations in South America. So this is where you get your Olmec civilization, your Aztec civilization, your Incan civilization, your Toltec civilization, and all these different civilizations that shot up over time in the super ancient world. We're talking about before the dynastic stuff in Egypt. Because that's what you got to remember, that a lot of this stuff in the Americas is older than that stuff in Africa. And a lot of these stuff in India is older than the stuff in Africa. Let me repeat that. A lot of these stuff in America is older than the stuff in Africa. A lot of these stuff in India or Hindustan is older than the stuff in Africa. So what is that telling you? That means that Africa brought a lot from America, and Africa brought a lot from India. And it also tells you that there were civilizations in India and America before there were civilizations in what we call present day, modern day, so-called Africa. So let's continue. See where I want to take y'all next. Okay, here we go. Amun-Ra and Osiris had covered 3 worlds. In an earlier age, the central seat had been the primitive Meru. In the later days, the Egyptian Empire, the priestcraft and soldiers retired and set up a new capital at Napata. But the days of world empire were over, which empire had lasted, some authorities say, for 6,000 years. So they just told you right here that Amun-Ra and Osiris had covered 3 worlds. And it says that in the earlier age, the central seat had been the primitive Meru. But in the later days of the Egyptian Empire, the priestcraft set up a whole new capital. So once again, just kind of, backing up that Egypt is not, Egypt got its stuff from somewhere else is ultimately what I'm saying. So now I want to bring y'all's attention somewhere else. Give me a little time real quick. Okay, so listen to this real quick. Now, remember, I told you all before that the ancient American civilizations really are extensions of ancient Ethiopia. And the gods of Mount Meru, a lot of them come from Atlantis or America, ancient America. So listen it up. One early Portuguese map gained from these Arabians marks South America, Western Africa, and Southern Europe as 3 ancient centers of civilization. Let me repeat that. I'm going to reread this whole sentence because it says that on an early Portuguese map gained from some Arabians that marked South America, West Africa, and Southern Europe as the ancient centers of civilization. So what was going on in South America? That is ancient Atlantis. We just got done talking about that. The home of the gods, Mount Meru, that's South America. West Africa, that is the other aspect of Atlantis, because during Pangea, this stuff was connected. And then you have Southern Europe. Who was in Southern Europe? The Moors, or the mariners, or the Aboriginals of the Mediterranean Sea. The Ethiopians of Southern so-called Europe. So we were all trading, we were all communicating with each other. All right. It says the remains of primitive American nations give forth relics proving ancient Cushite civil communication. Before the arrival of the Portuguese, Arabian navigators had kept this knowledge secret. So let me repeat. It says that the remains of primitive American nations give forth relics proving ancient Cushite communication. So it says that the primitive or ancient American civilizations or nations give forth relics, or that means that it was some type of monuments left behind, some type of tablets, maybe some type of stones with writings on it. But it says that the remains of primitive American nations give forth relics or evidence proving ancient Cushite communication. So it's saying right here that they have found relics that remain from primitive or old ancient American civilizations that prove they had ancient Cushite communication. So this is another thing that I'm trying to show, that even ancient America is a colony of the ancient Ethiopian Aboriginal indigenous world empire. So even the Americas is included in this, okay? So it goes on to say that it says the Phoenicians in later times followed courses that their Cushite cousins had pursued in earlier ages. They learned geography from their wide conquests and extensive trade relations. The Portuguese found maps and charts in their possession when they first came into contact with them on the east coast of East Africa, which were authentic and original. Some showed roots extending to the New World long before the age of Columbus. So this is saying right here that these Cushites had already been traveling, and they already had connections and communications and contact with the old American world prior to Columbus. It says that the ships of these Ethiopians in the early ages of their dominion covered the ancient world. So it says that the Ethiopians had ships. The Ethiopians were mariners. The Ethiopians were Moors. The Ethiopians were seafarers. And they were traveling around on the seven seas. So this is why we use the word Moor or Meru, because the gods of Meru ruled the entire planet. They were everywhere. Anyway, keep going. I don't know if y'all hear that ice cream truck in the background, but it is what it is. So let's reread this. It says that these ships, or the ships of these Ethiopians in the early ages of their dominion, covered the ancient world. So that means that the Ethiopians were everywhere. It was from this branch of the race that the early race of India gained the knowledge that appears in the Sanskrit books that contain maps upon which we can trace the outlines of Western Europe and the British Isles. These books portray knowledge of These books portray knowledge of ancient or of ages prior to the 2000 BCs. So it says that these ancient books portray knowledge of the ages prior to the 2000 BCs. The Phoenicians in later times only followed courses that their ancient Cushite cousins had pursued in earlier ages. So it says that all the, navigation routes that the Phoenicians knew, they got this stuff from their ancient Cushite cousins, because their Cushite cousins had already been traveling the world thousands of years before they were even around. Okay. Very, 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 very deep information. Okay. Check this out. With declining Ethiopian power, the links of this great chain had been broken to the Americas, but they still kept up the ancient lines of trades with the nations peculiarly Cushite, India, Chaldea, South Africa, and Western Europe. So it says right here that from a lot of, the decline of the Ethiopian power, that the link that the ancient civilizations had to the Americas was broken. Once again, from different, a lot of family infighting and stuff like that, trade routes, people fighting over natural resources and technology, and just wars. But nevertheless, it says that the American tie was somewhat broken. And it's talking about these ancient Arabian marks that showed that Southern Europe, South America, and Western Africa were the centers of civilization. And they were all trading with each other. Okay, let's keep going. It says, by caravan routes, they crossed deserts and delivered merchandise to the North African colonies, which in ages earlier than Phoenician dominion had been Cushite Ethiopian nations. Okay. Let's see real quick. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about. So let's do a little real recap real quick. So we already know that a lot of South America now, like South America is Meru, Atlantis. South America is Old Egypt. Okay. South America is Upper Egypt. North America is Lower Egypt. Let me repeat. South America is Upper Egypt. North America is Lower Egypt. So South America had a very, 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 very powerful, critical role in the old world. Okay. South America is popping. And that's where most of our stuff comes from, probably. As far as Aboriginal people, culture, etc. Okay. So let's check this out. It says, we find irrefutable evidence of the presence of these daring conquerors in the primitive legends, regions, religion, and institutions of America. Next, out of the dim day haze of far antiquity, rise excuse me, let me reread that whole shit. I fucked that up. My bad, y'all. Okay. Then across the screen comes flashing the ancient Cushite trade routes, which, contrary to our notion, were the medium by which rich and varied products were interchanged. So the ancient Cushite trade routes is how everybody was trading in the old world. So that means that they ruled these navigation, routes. They ruled the seas. Anybody that was trading had to go through these Cushites and then the later day Phoenicians that came from them. In the chapter on ancient Cushite commerce, we follow the ships on these early, daring, skillful seamen who, before the dawn of history, had blazed out the ocean trails that the Phoenicians later followed. We find irrefutable evidence of the presence of these daring conquerors in the primitive legends, religion, and institutions of America. Next, out of the dim haze of far antiquity, rise the indistinct lines of Atlantis of old, the race that gave civilization to the world, the race that tamed the animals and gave us domestication of plants. The gods of the ancient world were the kings and queens of mystic Atlantis. The chapter, The Gods of Old, make plain that the deities of Greece and Rome were also the kings and queens of the ancient Cushite empire of the Ethiopians, which was either the successor of the most famous branch of Atlantic race. So let me repeat this shit. This is some impactful shit. So the first thing it says is that the ancient Cushites already had these, navigation set. So by the time the Phoenicians came thousands of years later, they had the leftover remains from their ancestors. And that's how they knew about the 7 seas and how to travel around the world. Then it goes on to say that we have irrefutable evidence that shows that these ancient Cushites had been to America. And this evidence can be found in ancient primitive religion, and it can be found in primitive legends. And one of those legends is the legend of Amaru Meru. Because in that legend, it says that Amaru Meru is a Christ figure that led the people of Atlantis and Lemuria to set civilization up in South America. Then it goes on to say that the gods of the ancient world were the kings and queens of mystic Atlantis. So when we look at the Greek and Roman civilization and they talk about, let's say, Zeus or Aphrodite and all these different deities, when we look at even ancient Egypt, they talk about Osiris or Ammon or Heru. These gods of the ancient world actually were kings and queens of Atlantis. Let me repeat that. The gods of the ancient world and all these ancient literatures that you all know of, these gods, they actually were the kings and the queens of ancient Atlantis. Some pretty heavy shit. It says it was about these princes and heroes that all the wonderful mythology of the ancients wrote about. They were the deities that were worshipped in India, Chaldea, Egypt, and in Greece and Rome, which nations themselves must have been related to the race of Atlantis, that tradition said had been overwhelmed by the sea. Atlantis could not have been mythical, for her rulers were the subjects of the art and literature of all primitive nations until the fall of paganism long after the birth of Christ. Another division of Atlantis was transatlantic America. There, the mysterious mound builders represent the ancient Cushite race. We study the peculiar culture and genius of the fierce Aztec, who acknowledged that he received the germs of civilization from the much earlier Cushite inhabitants. We pass southward and examine the higher development of the wonderful Mayans of North America, whose ruins are attracting special study today, and we find there transplanted the Cushite arts of the ancient world. Next flash the pictures of the marvelous cultures and arts of the Incans, superior to those of Western Europe in 1492. From America, the story turns to the Bronze and Iron Ages. We seek the origin of the mysterious bronze implements of Western Europe found in the hand of the seemingly barbarous people. So what we have right here is that it says that transatlantic America is another division of Atlantis. It says that the mysterious mound builders represent the ancient Cushite race. It says that the genius of the Aztecs acknowledged that they learned their gems of civilization from the Cushite inhabitants. Then it goes on to say that the wonderful Mayans of North America studied and examined the work of the Cushites. And it also goes on to say that the marvelous culture and arts of the Incans are the remnants of Cushite literature and the Cushite arts of the ancient world. So, this is how America ties into the Cushite Empire, okay? This is how America ties into it. Okay? So, one more thing I'm going to read and we're going to wrap it up. It says that Cushite colonies were all along the southern shores of Asia and Africa, and by the archaeological remains along the southern and eastern shores of Arabia. It says the name Cush was given to 4 great areas: Media, Persia, Susiana, and Area. But I want to go on to say they were a dark colored race and the pioneers of our civilization. They were emphatically the monument builders. Then it goes on to say they were responsible for the monuments that dot southern Siberia and in America along the valley of the Mississippi down to Mexico and in Peru. Their images and monuments stand a voiceless witness. So it says right here that the valleys down along the Mississippi into Mexico and Peru were all erected, and all this civilization was started by the Cushites. So to wrap this up, the original indigenous Americans, which is us, the copper-colored Aboriginal people, we are the sons and daughters of the ancient Cushites or the ancient Ethiopians or the ancient Atlanteans, okay? Even when we talk about old Egypt or ancient Egypt, that's right here in America. So this is, probably confusing to some people, but nevertheless, this is the history. This is definitely the history. And I'll wrap it up with this. It goes on to say in another book that I have dealing with the mystery of Yakub, that these pyramid universities that were in Central America were the lands of Judah, Ham, Mu, the Cushite and the Chaldean nations in the Garden of Eden. So that means that the Garden of Eden and a lot of these original Cushite nations were in Central America. Okay? Central America. So if you want to know more about ancient America or old America, you got to look at the stuff before the flood. You see, we are the super ancient people. That's what I'm trying to get you all to understand. Like, our lost identity is that we are the super, super, super ancient people. Okay? So the Incans, the Mayans, the people of the Mississippi, the Creek, the Choctaw, all these various so-called indigenous tribes of America, we all come from the ancient Atlanteans or the ancient people of Meru, who are the ancient Ethiopians. And these are the first Autochthonous indigenous people of the planet. And they even have maps where I've seen a map one time where I've seen things in America named after Ethiopia. So this is why Christopher Columbus said when he came to the Americas, he found Ethiopians. And he wasn't lying. Now, a lot of people were confused and thinking that when he said Ethiopia, he meant people of East Africa. But what he meant was indigenous copper-colored people. Because Ethiopia means indigenous autochthonous people, just like the word Moor. So that's why it's funny. These people just want to keep arguing with me and stuff, and that's cool. But even the word Moor is the word Meru. Okay? Goes all the way back to ancient Ethiopia, and it goes back to the Cushites, who had ships, and they were the original seafarers, and their sons and daughters that were named the Phoenicians carried on that culture. So when they talk about the 12 tribes of Israel being scattered around the world, that was the ancient Ethiopians or the ancient Cushites, okay? Some of the ancient people, ancient Semitic people who were seafarers, and they were traveling around the world. That's why you find Hebrew text and Hebrew people all around the world. So once again, we are the people of Mount Meru. We are the people of Amaru, Meru, the people of the Garden of Eden, Atlantis, Turtle Island. That is us, the home of the gods. So all those gods in Vedic or Hindu mythology actually are the kings and queens of ancient America. All the gods of Egyptian mythology are the kings and queens of ancient America. All the gods of Greek and Roman mythology are the kings and queens of ancient America. So now you all can get a better understanding of why, we seem kind of special over here as Aboriginal people, and why the world tends to follow our trends, because we are the gods. We are the super gods. We're older than the gods. As a matter of fact, we would be more like the Titans. So we really aren't even gods. We really are the Titans, because we're older than the gods on Mount Olympus. Because once again, Zeus-Ammon is a king of Atlantis, but he's a god in Greek mythology. Just like Ammon is a god in Egyptian mythology, but he was a king in Atlantis. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this tape and got a lot of it. This is a salute to all the beautiful people of Turtle Island. Y'all keep on looking for y'all's heritage and history. And hopefully this put, some pieces to the puzzle. But Egypt is Atlantis or old America. Don't let them trick you and not have you think it is. And the mound builders and the pyramid builders of the Americas are the Ethiopians. That's why you see pyramids on every continent. India, Europa, Asia, Africa, America, so-called Alaska, or whatever. You find them everywhere because the Ethiopians or the Aboriginal indigenous people were everywhere. So that is why we are Aboriginal indigenous to the world itself. Okay, to the world itself. And this is how we tie to America. So no, we don't need to go back to Africa. You're already at home. You're already at home. But it's the boy Blackbeard. I hope y'all enjoyed this one. Hope you gained some out of it. Hit me up in the comment section. Y'all tell me what y'all think. Once again, the book I read was Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Houston. So don't y'all come in that comment section asking me what book I read. It was Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Houston. So whenever you see that word Negro, that really means Ethiopian, which also means Autochthonous indigenous earthling. Hope you learned something. Hope you gained something. It's the boy Blackbeard. Y'all stay tuned. Salute. I'm out.